Progressivism, the drive for reform. In this short video, I'm going to review with you some of the reasons why progressivism existed and what the goals of the movement were. We're going to focus on this part of today's lesson on what areas the progressives thought were in need of the greatest reform. Industrialization, urbanization, and immigration brought many benefits to America, but they also produced challenging social problems. So if you think about what we talked about in the Gilded Age, remember we have this idea of progress, and people really believed that industrialization was progress. But the flip side of that were the issues in the cities and that great divide between the rich and the poor. The progressives believed that they could change this, and in the 1890s and 1900s really worked using government and other means to fix these problems. They really focused on a number of different strategies, including working through the government to pass laws that would impact people socially, economically, and the government itself. You read a little bit in your homework about who the progressives were. To keep in mind, the people who made up the progressive movement came from many walks of life. They came from all political parties, social classes, ethnic groups, and religions. Many progressive leaders emerged from the growing middle class, whose power and influence were rapidly spreading. You also had industrial workers join, and a few wealthy Americans also joined because they wanted to better society. So if you think about the Gilded Age movie, remember there was a small percentage of people that were very wealthy. But during this time, because of industrialization, the middle class is growing. With that middle class came these ideas, and with those ideas came this progressive movement. One of the things we'll see is that as the middle class grows, many people are going to become educated. And this idea of using logic and reason will become very important in the progressive movement and really just in government itself. Part of what brought this group together from all walks of life was this belief that honest and efficient government could bring about social justice. It was also this key belief that industrialization and urbanization had created troubling social and political problems. Progressives really wanted to work to correct these problems and injustices. They encouraged their state legislatures and federal government to enact laws to address the issues faced by the poor. Progressives wanted to use logic and reason to make society work in a more efficient and orderly way. Many motivated by religious faith sought social justice as well. If you remember back in the 1800s to the populist movement, you can imagine some similarities or think of some similarities. Both are dealing with government corruption and really working to make the government really work for the people. They weren't all similar, though. In some ways, people differed. First, progressivism was mostly middle class that believed that highly educated leaders should use modern ideas. Remember, leaders of the populist movement were mostly farmers and industrial workers. If you think about our work earlier in the week, we looked at some political cartoons that dealt with some of these main issues: conservation, labor reform, political corruption, urban living, and so forth. You can tell that this is a very wide variety of issues and problems. And it will take a lot of different strategies to help solve these problems. Some progressives thought that political reform was the most urgent need. This included many women who were really working to win the right to vote. Other progressives thought that honest government needed to be the most important goal. They wanted to get rid of city officials who built themselves up on corrupt organizations called political machines. They wanted to get rid of political bosses and the bribery and all the things that made those political machines work. Because of this corrupt and ineffective government, there were a number of other problems as well. People were living in very crowded cities that were in need of infrastructure, including streets, drinking water, housing, and other municipal services. The lack of adequate services led to horrible living conditions for the urban poor. And what would happen is the political bosses would not fix these things and just give bribes and make shady deals to help them get richer while the conditions stayed the same. In addition to this, some progressives focused on big business and not government. If you think about the industrialists like Carnegie, they had taken over lots of businesses and created monopolies. Middle-class progressives wanted to create governments to bust the trusts and so create more economic opportunities for smaller businesses. In addition to this, you also saw a lot of social movements. As I mentioned earlier, there were people motivated by their religious faith, and they really wanted to reduce the growing gap between the wealthy and the poor. They focused on the harsh conditions at work, harsh working conditions, and also on the city slums. They wanted social welfare laws to help children, as well as government regulations to aid workers and consumers. As we go through the next couple of days, it's going to be important for you to think about this list and think about what issues would be important to you. We've touched on some of these today, some of the general issues, and we'll get into some more of the women's rights in some more detail, racism, conservation in the next coming days. So think about what interests you and what you would like to look at in more detail.